y'all. Welcome back to another episode of In the Kitchen with Baker Girl. Thank you, Jesus. It is a beautiful day to be in the kitchen. And today, I want to do a really quick video on how to be your own butcher and save tons of money this year. So today's quick episode is all about being your own butcher and saving money. Now, since I was going to be butchering up some beef today, I thought I would just do a really quick video about the types of beef that I'm going to be using, but also how to save money with because these are money-saving cuts of beef. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is, the first thing I'm going to talk about is how you're saving money by using these cuts of beef. Now, as you can see, these are some very large cuts of meat. Like, this is cut pretty much from the whole animal and then just packaged. It's not like, you go to the grocery store and you get these little neat cuts that's been trimmed and all those, and none of that. This is just straight up meat cut off the cow, packaged and ready for you to use it however you want to use it. So I'm going to go down the list of how you're saving money by using these cuts of beef. Now, number one, how you're saving money is, just like I said, these are pieces of beef literally cut from the cattle carcass and packed and cut to obviously more manageable, but not too much. There's not a lot been done to this meat at all. Now, they had other cuts there. They had entire beef ribs, and I'm talking about what they call the primal cut ribs, which was about this long, about, this wide. Cattle beef rib is very large and they're very long, because of course a cow or a bull or a steer is a very large animal. So the ribs are going to be huge, and they were really, really big. They were a little too big for me to handle. Perfect if you're used to handling, ribs that are this long and all that, but I'm not quite used to handling those gigantic cuts. But they were very affordable because it's literally the entire rib section cut off from a cow, probably really a steer, and a male cow, not a bull. It's a young, I hate to call them cows because cows are females and steers and bulls are males. But it was the entire rib cut off of the animal and then just cut in half and packaged, and that's it. They do nothing else to it. So you save money because all of that work that goes into those neat little packages of beef that we love to purchase at the grocery store actually makes it more expensive because it has become more labor intensive. The more labor somebody puts into something, obviously, the more they're going to charge you. So these cuts of beef are whole, no labor, except for maybe, obviously the bones and things is removed. You can get it with the bone in it, but all of these are boneless cuts. So that's one way, one very big way, really. The biggest way you save money is by just getting the whole piece of meat, untrimmed, uncut, with the bone if you can, and you save a ton of money that way. Now, how you can, once again, save money with these cuts. You can then take these cuts of meat and cut them up into whatever you want. You can, go to the library, check out free books on these cuts or different cuts of meat and find out, what cut of beef that we like to purchase at the grocery store, from what cut of meat does it come? And then you can cut it into whatever you want, whether it's roast or it's steak or it's cube meat or it's whatever. You can take an entire cut of meat and do that yourself, kind of like be your own butcher. So that is another way you save tons of money. And also, when they butcher meat for the grocery store, it's a total different process than the way, say, your local butcher would do it. unless that is how you want it. So typically when you walk into a meat market and you know, the butcher's behind the counter and you say, you know, I want this, I want this, I want this, they will have some already cut neat little pieces of meat ready to go in the cold section. But if you ask, they will go to the back and get the whole uncut meat, piece of meat, and then trim it down into whatever you want, however you want it. So say you're a person, you love ribeyes, and the typical ones you get at the grocery stores can be 1 inch, 1.5 inch. What if you wanted, maybe, I don't know why you would, but you may want a 3-inch ribeye, or a 2-inch ribeye, or a 1/2-inch ribeye, or a 1/4-inch ribeye. Well, if you go to the grocery store, they're already pretty much laid out. You don't really have a choice. When you go to a butcher, you can ask the butcher, I would like, you know, 5 ribeyes cut into 1/4-inch for quick cooking, or 1/2 inch, or 1 inch, or 1.5 inch. And then the butcher can customize it how you want it. Or you can buy your own cut and cut whatever size ribeyes you want. Now, how we handle these cuts of meat and how we purchase these cuts of meat. Now, this is fresh beef. It's not frozen. And you want to avoid super bloody cuts of meat. So as you notice, this piece, it's got some blood in it because it's fresh meat, but it's not like super bloody. You want to avoid that because that means it's probably been frozen and thawed. So just check the color. It should obviously have some redness, but it should not be overly red. So that's thing one. Now, whether you choose boneless or bone-in or whatever, sometimes depends on what they have. And also sometimes depends on what you want. Just know that if you buy meat with the bone, it's going to weigh more because obviously the bones. You also want to make sure you're not getting a piece of meat that just have, you know, like half fat, half meat, because then you're just buying a lot of fat you won't really use. So look for a cut of beef that, this is a chuck top blade. Now, we all love a chuck roast, but this is the top blade of the chuck. And this piece of beef, you can cut it into whatever you want it to be. You can use it for stew meat. You can use it for ground. You can also use it, say you like to make inexpensive steaks. You can use it to make a good inexpensive steak because as you can see, it has some fat, but not a ton of fat. So it's not a super fatty cut. This is better for slow cooking. Anytime you find meat that doesn't have a lot of marbling running through it, it's better for slower cooking. So you could braise this in the oven. You could cook it in a slow cooker. You can, as I say, turn it into stew beef and make delicious beef stew with it. You can grind it up and have a really good ground, which is what I'm going to do with this. I'm actually going to grind this up. So that's one thing you could do with this. Now, this is a whole boneless eye of round. Now, we all know eye of round at the grocery store. You usually get, say, this point, and it's cut like this. So it's about this big. And it's a very lean cut of meat. This one that I bought actually has a little bit more fat on it. So it's not quite as lean as the ones you get at the grocery store, which all of the fat has been removed. You're just left with that little point of meat. This, I'm going to grind this up as well. And I'm going to grind up both of these. Now, you can also cook some of this meat in a sous vide, by the way, one of those sous vide machines. You know, it's the immersion. You put it in water. You put the meat, however you cut it, into a vacuum sealed bag, and then you submerge the meat down. The water usually is set at about 135, 129, 130 degrees, and then the meat cooks for whatever you're aiming for, and it cooks very gently. That's a good way to cook these leaner cuts, especially eye of round, because it's very lean. So that's one thing you could do with this beef. And one thing I'm also going to do with some of it, because this is pretty big, so I don't need to grind all of it up. I can use some of it for other things. And I know I also want to have some for stew beef, and I'm going to save the chuck for the stew beef. Now, you can make, you don't have to grind it all up, as I say. You can use it and cut it into other things. You can braise some of it. Just be sure, however you cook it nice and low and slow, because you don't want to overcook it and dry it out, because they're very lean. They'll dry out fairly quickly. Avoid high heat at all costs. So no slapping this on the grill and no. This needs to be braised or gently cooked. Now, speaking of grinding this up, I'm actually going to combine the chuck and the eye of the round and grind it up. That'll give me a nice, softer meat. You can also mix some of this beef up with, say, something like American Wagyu, which is very good. I typically mix Wagyu and venison up because venison is very lean. Venison is way leaner than beef. So I will mix it. If you're not used to a lean meat, if you're used to lean meat, there's no need to worry about adding all this stuff. It will be fine for you. We're used to a very lean meat because we eat a lot of venison. Most people do in our area. So at least they do now. I remember years ago, you didn't too much hear of people eating venison. I remember being a girl in Atlanta and having to hunt down meat processors to process the deer. My dad would go into areas like Beaufort, Georgia, and where this was before Beaufort was built up. I mean, if you ride through Beaufort now, it's nothing like it used to be. But we had friends there, and they had lots and lots of land. And Daddy would go hunting, and then he would get deer, and we literally had to hunt down the meat processors if we didn't do it ourselves. But now it's getting a lot easier, and I'm very thankful and grateful for our local butcher who does the meat processing for us, especially when it comes to deer. Now, back to the beef. Now, this is, as I say, this is a whole sirloin roast. And of course, we all know about sirloin steaks and all of those things. But this is also known as a poor man or woman's brisket, because if you don't want to pay the high price for a brisket, and the brisket is expensive, even a whole brisket, and I was looking at a whole brisket yesterday, and I was thinking, I'm looking at it, and I'm like, that is really expensive. It is. It is expensive because you're literally getting the whole brisket, which is about this long. It's a really, really big piece of meat. The reason why I did not buy it wasn't so much, okay, so yeah, the price was a tiny bit of a drawback. But the second reason why the price was a drawback, because I knew you have to trim a brisket. You just can't, take it and start cooking. You have to trim a brisket. And you can trim away up to 6 to 7 pounds of silver skin, of fat, that hard fat that won't render. You have to trim that away. You cannot cook it. It will not render. It'll just be a very hard, thick piece of fat on the brisket. And another thing about it, it prevents the flavor from penetrating the meat. Whatever you put it on it, or however you cook it, because you could smoke it. If it has that very hard, thick, fat cap remaining on it, the seasoning won't go through the meat. So that's another reason why you would trim away all and most of that excess thick fat. So that was couple of the main reasons of why I didn't buy the brisket. You can, if you are the person, if you're like a pit master and you're into that kind of stuff, then obviously it's no big deal to you. If you are a person who, say you own your own barbecue joint or whatever, then that will be, you get a return on it because obviously you are selling the meat. But I'm not a fancy meat person. I'm more of focused on the quality of it and how it tastes versus, say, like ribeyes. I have to confess, and T-bones, I really don't care anything at all about T-bones and ribeyes. And I know that's like, oh, what do you mean? But I genuinely don't, because to me, any cut of meat can be delicious if it's cooked properly. I mean, take the eye of the round. It's a lot cheaper. It's a lot leaner. But if you cook it right, and I sit down and eat, I'll enjoy it just as much as I would any fancy ribeye. So they had whole ribeyes there. And I mean, not the one you're used to in the grocery store. This was like the entire area on the animal where the ribeye comes from. So I skipped over a lot of those fancier cuts of meat. I also skipped over the more expensive cut of chuck because I skipped over it because it wasn't necessary for what I wanted. It's good if you like a good pot roast or a good chuck roast, or if you specifically, if you're making ground beef and you must have ground chuck burgers, by all means, you would get the whole chuck. I'm happy with this cheaper cut of chuck, and I'll sit down and enjoy my burgers and my hot dogs just as well as I would if I had got the more expensive cut. This cut of beef, I think, was right around $46, and the more finer cut of chuck was right around $60, $70. I didn't see any need of getting that. I'm just going to grind it up anyway, and I didn't really see the need of getting the more expensive cut. But as I say, all of that depends, and I'm running from the sun here, y'all, quite literally. If you know this time of year, the sun is just right in the kitchen because these two huge windows at the back of the kitchen just lets full sunlight in. Lovely, because I don't have to use any lights during the day. But when I'm on camera, then I'm kind of like ducking and dodging the sun. But now what I'm going to do with this, back to the sirloin roast. This, as I said, this is also known as a poor person's brisket because you can smoke this like a brisket. You can turn it into corned beef, which is what I'm going to do with it. And you can also treat it and turn it into pastrami, which corned beef and pastrami is the same meat that goes into a different direction once you cook it. And I'll explain that in another video, but they're pretty much the same meat. It is the same meat. Now that I've said it, I feel like I must explain. So you treat the meat the same way. When you're corning beef, you're pickling, you're brining the beef. When you take it out of the brine, whether it's 6 days or 10 days or 20 days, however long you leave it pickling in that brine, when you take it out and you start to season it and cook it, that is where the piece of meat can go into two different directions. If you're making corned beef, you would boil it or braise it. If you're making pastrami, you would coat it in a seasoning and then you would smoke it, or you could do like a cheap oven smoke. Very low and slow for a very long time. And then you have pastrami or you have corned beef. So it just really depends on what direction you take the meat, but it's the same cut of meat and treated the same way. But this I am going to use to make a poor person's corned beef because it's typically made with brisket, but as I explained earlier, I didn't want to spend that kind of money on a brisket and have to trim away 10 pounds of it and then left with, piece of meat that's like this, and then I didn't really want to bother with it. This whole boneless sirloin will do very nicely. And you're gonna cook, whether it's the brisket for corned beef or pastrami or this whole sirloin, it all must be cooked low and slow for a very long time. So, regardless, I cannot cook this any faster than I would if I was using brisket. The only difference is I don't have all that fat to trim. And so I'm saving money. And if you treat the meat right and cook it right, it'll be equally tasty. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm going to save this one for a poor person's corned beef mock brisket. And these two will be ground. I have a meat grinder. I'm going to grind these two and make ground beef, which I will then, Lord willing, I will turn into hot dogs and burgers, patties, ground beef for burgers, and also some sausage too. Because in the winter, we do like a little bit of sausage for breakfast every now and then. I don't eat a lot of sausage. We ain't big sausage people. Especially not beef sausage, more of deer sausage. But that's what's going to be happening with these two pieces of meat. Now, I actually bought more meat than this, but this is just to kind of show you just a few of the cuts that I bought and what I'm going to do with them. So I hope some of this help you guys out, because as I said, you know, beef is something that's getting very expensive right now. And, you know, it all really depends on how much time you want to invest into saving money. That's how I look at it. How much time do I want to invest in saving money? Because, you know, if you have an off day and you have a bit of spare time, you can get an inexpensive meat grinder and grind your own beef. One of our local butchers told me this. She said, the beef that you get at the grocery store, which I really hadn't thought about, can literally come from who knows how many animals can be in that one package of ground beef. It could be 10 cows, it could be 50 cows, it could be 1,000 cows. How would you know? All of that meat goes into the grinder and get ground up. So you won't know what's, like, it could be other things in it too. How would you know? But you know what I always say? Even in baking, if you make it yourself in your own kitchen from scratch, in this case, you know exactly what is in your ground beef. You know how fresh it is. You know when you did it. It's not like, you know, some mystery meat, how long it's been frozen. You know how many times it's been frozen, if it's been frozen. Now, one thing I want to say before I go. I have a meat grinder. I have two of them, actually. One is a KitchenAid attachment, and then another one is a full-grown meat grinder with a sausage stuffing attachment to it. But you don't need that. You know what I always say, you don't always need fancy stuff. You can use a food processor, and I've shared that with you guys in my how to make your own sandwich meat video. I'll link that video in the iCards below. But you can use a food processor to grind your own meat. You just have to cut it into smaller pieces, and you want to make sure anytime you're grinding beef, you want to make sure it's semi-frozen. Doesn't need to be totally, obviously not totally frozen, but does need to be semi-frozen. So I'm going to cube this up and dry it well, and then put it in the freezer and semi-freeze it before I move on to grinding it. And you would do the same thing. Just if you're using the food processor, you need to cut it up into smaller pieces and work in smaller batches. And just like I showed you where I make my own homemade ground chicken, you do exactly the same way. Now, the texture depends on you. For hot dogs, the meat needs to be almost to a puree. Whereas for ground meat, it just needs to be to a coarse grind. And if you know you like your burgers with a little bit less texture, grind it a little bit more. If you know you like your burgers a little bit more of a meaty, say, steakhouse burger, grind it a little bit less. So all of that is entirely up to you and how you like it. But you don't need fancy stuff, because that is the whole point of cooking and baking in our own kitchens, is that you don't need the fancy stuff. The shops and stuff, they have the fancy stuff. One thing you do need, though, folks, you do need a really, really sharp knife. Now, I have a block of knives, and these are made out of Damascus steel. All respect to that. Not entirely sure what it means. But that is what it says. I do have respect for that, though, because these knives are like, they're like razor blades. They really are. They're just like razor blades. And I keep these away from my regular knives in my kitchen because they are so sharp. They're not exactly the kind of thing you want, you know, just, you know, hanging around in the kitchen. For somebody to just grab it and then say, oh, I'm going to cut. And then, you know, they get a shock and go, oh my goodness, that's sharp. So I keep these knives separate. And only Sarah used these knives, nobody else. But you want a really good, sharp knife. This is similar to a boning knife, although this is not exactly a boning knife because the blade is a little bit too wide. A boning knife is thinner and has a little bit of a curve to it. but this will do nicely. I don't have a boning knife, so this is long and thin enough. It'll be very, it'll do nicely. And then of course you have your regular cutting knife. This knife has a little bit of a bend in it, which gives you a little bit more control and take out some of the work on your wrists. And then this is just a general good all-round chopping knife. And then I also have a small knife. This one too has a little bit of a bend in it. This one is just good for the little touch-up detail work. But make sure you have a good knife and use one of these to sharpen your knife between work, because if it's a dull knife, it's just going to make your work go a lot longer, and it's not fun. Working with a dull knife is never fun. And of course, a good set of shears, more useful if you're working with chicken, like if you're butchering chicken. One thing I do want to say about butchering chicken, which has nothing to do with butchering beef, but working with these super sharp knives when you're butchering chicken, you just want to be aware that this knife will cut through the bone just as easy as it cuts through the meat. And you could inadvertently have little pieces of bone. So just know what you're cutting, because it doesn't really differentiate between cutting through bone and cutting through meat, because it's very sharp. So I have noticed that I have to pay more attention. And same thing with these shears. They will swoop right through a chicken bone just as easily as anything else. So you just have to be aware, just be aware of that when you are working with these super sharp knives. So I hope you find this video somewhat useful, somewhat helpful, because that's what I'm here for. I want to help you guys save money, and I also like to take a kind of, demystify a thing, because it's fun and easy, and it just seems, like there's something mysterious goes on. The butcher comes out with this nice cut of meat, and you don't really see the animal carcass hanging in the freezer back there or in the cold room where they cut. Actually, in our butcher shop, you can see the carcass hanging. If you walk in the shop, the carcass is literally hanging, and you can watch them go back there and cut off whatever you want and cut it up. But for a lot of us, and I know when I was a girl, there weren't no butchers around where we lived in Metro Atlanta where you could go and say, no, I don't want that side, I want this side. That did not exist. So any beef that my mom bought was just like the beef any of us get at the grocery store. It was already cut and already packaged. But if you have the ability and the freedom to do this yourself, do it yourself. It'll save you a ton of money. And it's like insurance for your mind. If you can save money and you can have good food, it's a stress reliever to me. And there's nothing worse, really. There is, I say nothing worse, but it's heartbreaking when you're put to just buy whatever the grocery store has and you have no choices. And I dearly love having choices of what I'm eating and all of these things. So this is just a quick little video to show you how you can do it yourself, because DIY ain't just for hammering and nailing and painting and screwing. We can DIY in the kitchen too. So I am about to DIY ground beef today. So that I've got to roll up my sleeves and get to work. And that is what I would be doing. If you do choose to go down that road, I've got just one more quick tip for you. Clean out your work area. Have plenty of paper towels. Have some good hot water ready so you can always wash your hands. Use food gloves. They will save you a ton of stress. Have plenty of bowls and things ready to hand that you can put meat, sheet trays or whatever you can place meat on. Have a space cleared in your freezer so you can put the meat, and have packaging things ready. Whether it's you're going to use a vacuum sealer or some good old Ziploc bags. Have those ready and open, so all you have to do is put the portions in there. You can weigh it out, write on it, so you can know whether I'm putting in 1 pound packages or 2 pound packages or half a pound packages. however you want to do it. You can also write on it what you intend to do with that meat, because once it's frozen, it all kinds of start looking the same. But I'm going to get to grinding this beef and get to making some homemade hot dogs, which will be quite nice. But actually, I've been craving a good burger, so I think I might get started on the burger meat first. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was something useful to you. You may not learn anything because most of you probably already know a lot of this, but I hope maybe it stirs you up to do some of this yourself, because it's easy to get into the habit of just picking up, packaged, ready to go things, just like baked goods. But yeah, there's no need for that. We can do it in our own kitchen. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and the good Lord willing, I will see you guys again in another video. Take care, y'all. Bye.
Do your best to come to me quickly. For Gamma.